Are you going to get yourself a pair of white wall tires? Are you going to cruise the Miracle Mile?
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Durdle Maniacs. If you want to be a Durdle Maniac, go to patreon.com/Eternal Durdles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Dude, how many contested game balls are you going to play in 8cast?
Contested game ball. I guess I'll have to read that once we get to that part of the cast.
Dude, if you play, like, look, dude, contested game ball, if it goes uncontested, it's just 5 cards. Let's just draw yourself 5 sweet cards. Sweet cards.
I want to start the episode off by talking about your journey over the last week with Miracles, because you had that 4-0, and then you had a 1K on Saturday.
Yeah, I first want to kick things off with I want to apologize to the greater community at large because I've gotten some feedback that I've been overly negative for a good portion of a lot of the last like X months of episodes on the format, and I hear that and I want to like refocus and become lean towards the positives of things because like it sucks to be the negative Nancy all the time. And nobody wants that, and it's not interesting. So I'm gonna. I hear the feedback, and I appreciate people feeling comfortable enough to like let me know. And I'm gonna like focus more on the positives, which is what this episode is gonna steer into a bit. We'll talk some Lost Caverns of Ixalan's. We'll talk E-dubs. For my fellow control mages out there, we'll talk about some control. Zach, maybe we'll talk about your waffling on Legolas's quick reflexes and
I'm waffling on everything right now.
How quick those are. But yes,
I want to jump in, Phil, and say real fast. I personally appreciate the how critical you are about the format. Like, I think that it's necessary to be at least somewhat critical. But I mean, no one wants somebody crapping on it the entire time. But I think it is important to at least look at the format with a critical eye and see what could be better. I personally didn't think that you were going overboard, or I would have said something to you about like, oh man, Phil, like,
Yeah, I think it's just framing, right? It's presentation, because like the struggle and the constant, trying to look at everything from a macro sense of like how to navigate and attack the format as it constantly turns, at a really rapid pace these days. It's like, the presentation of how to attack it is probably can be shifted a little bit so it doesn't just sound like it's constant bitching. You know what I mean?
It's a control player's nightmare out there.
But it's like it's tough because the format is wide in a regard, and like there's a lot of things that punish the type of stuff that I like to play. So like I'm looking everything through that particular lens, but that doesn't necessarily translate. And I totally get that. I hear it, and I think like I'm going to continue to be critical about the things that I think we can. Like the softnesses in the format that we can attack to, like, particularly with an event like E-dubs coming up, EW, Eternal Weekend, E-dubs. And I think that like the format as it's shaking out, with some shakeups coming from the Commander product for Lord of the Rings, which we'll get into. I think that like EW presents not only like an interesting thing where the format is sort of settled a little bit post Lord of the Rings. People are sort of seeing like, okay, we've sort of adjusted to Bowmaster being in the meta and how we're supposed to navigate that and card choices and whatnot. Beanstalk has sort of overhauled the control decks and like how we're supposed to like navigate those things. 8cast now is like learning to adjust and the other artifact decks, if you will. I've seen Painter make some adjustments too, where the adjustments that I've seen from a lot of different decks is making it difficult as a control mage to figure out what exactly to bring into the thing. Like I was just talking with Andrew Ahern before this episode of like trying to figure out what the sideboard is with like how many Veil of Summers to play. But like the thing is that Veil of Summer is like one of those cards where it's like, yeah, if you catch the Thoughtseize, it's awesome. But if you ever navigate a position where you inadvertently like turn the Veil of Summer face up, like then it's really bad, So there's some dancing around to be done there. But I mean, if we want to talk about where your head's at, because I know that you're
Yeah.
bouncing around like a couple of decks at this point for EW,
Yeah.
and I imagine that like your mindset is probably similar to like a lot of people who aren't just like, you know, hard and fast, stubborn control mages like me who are only gonna ever play one thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, you know, I right now, you know, again, like, you know, so you're the control mage, I'm the budget mage, right? Like, I have to play within the bounds of what I have. Like, I just got a new job, so eventually I'll be able to buy back into the format and play with dual lands and stuff like that. But right now, you know, I might borrow cards to go play Infect at EW. And that'll be a rarity for me because I don't really like to play with what I have. But then I've also got the options of 8-cast, which I've been doing quite well with, and Death Shadow. And I think the tough part about 8-cast is, you know, what you were saying about the control thing is it's hard once everyone knows what you're up to. Like a year ago, 8-cast was kind of not an unknown quantity, but it was a punch. You know, like you saw that deck and you were like, well, I haven't even really devoted sideboard slots to a deck like this yet. It's doing well, but it's not like the number one deck in the format. And then it, like, you know, maybe 2 months from now it was like the deck to play. You know, I think when I went to when we went to EW, I played 8-cast, but I played you know a pretty stock list at the time that didn't play the automatons or anything like that. And now we're looking at the automaton version, and you know, like, it's Swifty time is doing pretty well with it. We just saw the post from Tony Scaponi where he XO'd the challengers just recently.
Well, he was playing PO. That was a combo deck, which is different.
With PO, but his final match was with Swifty time. In Swifty time, and that list looks interesting. One of the things I kind of liked about that list is I love Emery. Like, I think Emery is just like one of the best designs for a card in a really long time. And, you know, it gets around your own chalice, but it's a 1-drop. There's also, it just has so much going for it. Feeds your yard. Overall, like, a very cool card to play. And it's like very flavorful. It's the Lady in the Lake, right? But this list that it's Swifty Time just played skews a couple of those to play main deck Hull Breachers, which I kind of like, because I think the deck, I'm not 100% sold personally on Automaton as like the way to go. I'm still like
Patchwork, you mean, right?
Yeah, Patchwork Automaton, and I'm still a little like, it's a little too aggressive for me. I want to be drawing more cards, and that deck basically skews away from the 8-cast and goes like more 5-cast. It cuts thought monitors and stuff. And I really just loved playing like 8 draw 2s in the deck and really just churning through your deck and figuring it out. So I'm a little like, I'm not sure what to do with that. And then you've got Metallic Rebuke in there, which I think is a great include. Because it's basically like Force of Wills, 5 through 8 that just appear in the deck as well. So there's that. There's, I could play Infect. I like Infect. I think that Infect, especially for the next few weeks, is going to be sort of unknown for a lot of people. A lot of people are going to be caught off guard by that deck, and especially if they aren't playing from now until Eternal Weekend. They're going to definitely be caught off guard with it. There's something that Bosch and Roll, Brian Koval, said when we interviewed him right after his win with Cephalid Breakfast in June was, I want to be in a place where I'm not losing to people who just own old cards and live in Baltimore, right? And that's how I feel about going to EU. Like, I don't want to lose to people who own old cards and live in Pittsburgh. So I want to be really solid with whatever deck I'm playing, but I want to make sure I don't lose to a guy who just like owns meltdowns. Like I want to be at the top of my level. I'd like to bring home something for the cast. Like that's where my head's at. I'm done proving that like the deck I'm playing is good or not. The decks I'm generally playing are top tier decks within my budget range. So what I need to do at Eternal Weekend is determine which of those decks I want to play, and then just nail that down and get in as many reps as I can on Magic Online with that deck, because I think that is getting that practice in is going to be the most important part of this whole thing. Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
So the question I was going to ask based off of that sentiment is 8cast, like, do you feel 8cast is positioned well enough, or does it need more adjustments beyond Hull Breacher?
That's the problem. I think we gotta check with what its Swifty time decides to do over the next few weeks. But I think that the deck is going to skew more towards the Hull Breacher plan, and it's a plan that like works with your deck too, because getting those treasures pumps your whole team, pumps your constructs and stuff like that. Obviously, it's good to just have extra mana lying around, but it doesn't make it any less soft to Meltdown. And Meltdown's the real problem here. And even like over the last week, I played in an event, and my opponent slammed down an energy field, and I was like, or energy flux, and I was like, all right, like that ends my game. There's not a lot you can do. Like you can basically float a bunch of mana and get like one more attack in. But, if you're losing all of your artifacts, your constructs are terrible. It stays on the board. So it's even worse than Meltdown. At least you can build back from Meltdown. You can't build back from energy flux. And if that's where the meta's headed, as far as hate pieces are concerned, that's not the deck for me to be playing,
Yeah, so it's interesting because like I have seen Hull Breacher, and I get it. I understand why Hull Breacher would get the nod, particularly with the artifact synergies off treasures and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that was the place that people went without having a way to compel your opponent to draw cards. Because I remember when Hull Breacher was around with like the LED Echo, right? And it was just like the sort of like get you deck where it would just go end step Hull Breacher LED or play Hull Breacher LED Echo and like wheel the opponent out of the game. And
well, the 3-2-1 turn 1 is still good, right? Like
that's what I so like from my point of view, when I like if I'm sitting across from a Hull Breacher, like yes, it means that I have to like navigate and play a little bit slower and around it and whatnot. But that's also something where I go, oh, does that make it actually a valuable tool for 8cast? Because it's the rest of your deck is this proactive machine. And then you just slot in this contextual card that's reactive and only good if your opponent agrees to it, you know? Or if they present you a position to get them, And I'm like, I would think that if you're the deck that's spamming and you want to like lock down the opponent for like playing high resources, because like 8cast is obviously very good at playing high resources. That's one of the better reasons to play the deck in the first place. Yeah. And when like I know that like maybe there's tools that we're not thinking of. I know there's some stuff from Cavern of Ixalan. Like there's that new legendary blue artifact that taps for 2 that you can activate abilities for. Like maybe there's something there. Maybe there's not. Who knows? But I remember for a little while there was also on like the more Staxy style of 8cast where people were playing things like Tangle Wire and stuff like that. Where if the issue that the deck has is keeping up with the opposing decks that are just drawing a bunch of cards, like if you aren't able to bury them anymore, then I would lean towards, okay, well, what are ways, like if there aren't really good sufficient tools at punishing the actual drawing of cards, if we're not playing our own Bowmaster, or if Hull Breacher is sort of inconsistent, or it doesn't feel like it's doing enough for the slot, then like leaning towards like the axis that stops them from actually deploying all of those resources becomes a pretty interesting spot, which is also a space that 8cast does not interact with, right? Like when it comes to opposing mana bases, or like you said, opposing enchantments or whatnot, like it doesn't have ways to deal with that unless it's playing the random
borrower, maybe like that's it. Yeah.
So it's like I think that there might be. This is like it's kind of interesting that 8cast might be in a space where it's been a top deck for however long now, ever since Kappa Cannoneer came out, right? Or Saga, Kappa Cannoneer, and then it became a deck. That maybe it's been around and is a mainstay long enough now that it's time for it to go through its first major evolution since it's been, this
I would say
the ACAS deck,
it's been doing that this summer with the automaton builds. Like,
Mhm.
I think that's the true first like pivot was like, oh, we missed this card when like we should have been playing with this card since the deck existed, right? And then just now, like, the past, like, let's say 8 months, people have been playing automaton and realizing that is good, but it does change fundamentally how the deck works. For me, I was, like, I was leaning heavily on Saga to do all the work. Like, if you've watched any of our casts where I talk about, coming back from a tournament, I'm like, prioritize Saga, win the game, right? And now it's not necessarily prioritize Saga and win the game. It is prioritize getting out a threat on turn one and not losing, and then untapping and making it huge and just trying to like stay in the game for long enough to win. And to me, based on the playstyle that I've been going through, what happens to me is I am immediately I'm in the wrong zone, right? Like I found myself playing against people being like, okay, turn one, I'm going to play this. And then they're like, cool, Doomsday. And I'm like, I could have done things differently to like not lose to that. Like I went
Mhm.
too hard into playing this route, and I should have been playing, a more effective game in the, against all the decks, instead of just being like, I'm going to be an aggressive deck. And, against decks like Maverick and stuff, like, they don't care if you have a 1/1 that they can't target. They'll just block it, like.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting that like maybe Patchwork is, it was good momentarily when, Delver was the major target, but if the format's going to be a little bit wider, having your Tarmogoyf on turn one, even if it can get huge, may not actually be good if it's, if top decking a Tarmogoyf later in the game when you don't have the spear to attach to it, maybe it's like, yeah, maybe Automaton's not the optimal way, or not the optimal position to be in, particularly because if you have Automaton, like, you also have to imagine too, right? If you're on Automaton and like Kappa and like all these stuff that point removal is otherwise really soft against, then Emery's just going to be a lightning rod at all times.
My other thought, Phil, is so there's the Urza Lord High Artificer build that you can do. You can change things around a little bit to make that work, which is fine. I think that's interesting. But if you're doing that, then I feel like you kind of want to be on Painter. And if that's the case, like, maybe I should be playing Blue Painter instead, basically be a combo deck instead of being an aggro deck. And that's a whole discussion about like where I need to spend my money at. But I think that might just be the stronger build of the deck and the one people aren't expecting.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, I mean, I know that we've seen Urza Saga in the past as like a sideboard card for the grindier matchups in a Painter build, but I don't know necessarily that. Like, it's interesting to me because I don't think that something like that is necessarily stuck and confined to like those shells. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Urza Saga is just necessarily like, yes, it turns all of your board into Moxen or whatever, and like, it has some combo potential, but I don't necessarily think that it has to be in that combo space. Like, if Emery is the best thing to be doing, and you need to ensure that it lives, like, the one thing that it has, that all these cards have in common, is they are legendary. I mean, I know Adawara works really, really well, and it was what, a 3 of back when it was like a ton of size and a ton of Emerys and stuff. But like, I mean, if you wanted to play that sort of plan, like, I don't know if it's totally out of bounds to be trying something where you're a little bit more interactive, right? You have more interaction instead of like early beat Tarmogoyfs, because then you can go over the top with your engines, right? Urza Saga's an engine, Emery's an engine, and if you can protect your engines, then you can outmuscle the other players, as opposed to like being low to the ground and trying to like pummel underneath, which is good if you're on the play, but bad if you're on the draw. Like, Automaton gets way better on the play than it does on the draw for obvious reasons, right? So whereas like Emery is always just a great turn one play if you know that if you assume that you get to untap with it, right? Like, even Chalice of the Void in the dark isn't necessarily good on turn one. Like, you always slam it for X=1 in the blind.
That was actually one of the mistakes I made. Is I was like, okay, I have the option of a turn one Chalice versus a turn one Automaton, and I was like, I think like, just let's see what happens if I get too aggressive, and literally just lost the game immediately. Like, just whoops,
I mean, it's like, is the shell essentially like if you could play 8 Emerys, you'd play 8 Emerys?
I mean, yeah. So like, that's what Welder does, right? Like they're just like on engineers and welders, red painter, and that seems to work out for them. The other option is like, there's still experimentation time. I could be playing with one rings and stuff and Emery and try and make that a thing. I think there's a lot of room to brew in the 8-cast meta, and not every deck, like, it's like the Red Prison decks, right? You've got Red Prison with Blood Moon, Magus of the Moon, all that stuff, and then you've got Painter as well. And somewhere there's a in between on those two styles of decks. And I think that there's a lot of room in between there too. There's a lot of people playing like kind of like it's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. But I think right now, blue artifact decks only have like blue Painter and 8-cast, and there's probably room in the middle to maximize off of using the one ring. I mean, there's the PO deck is doing that, right? Like using the one ring and keys and stuff to do stuff. Is that what that one does? I forget. But there is a deck that uses the keys. I think that's
PO.
The PO deck, yeah. So
it's PO. There's also like the Mystic Forge deck, but that's not blue.
Yeah. So the Mystic Forge deck has kind of seen its day and gone in a different direction because and there's a great video I just watched. Phil Gallagher, Thraben U, just did a whole like all the decks in the format. Like he missed a couple, but basically just went over all the decks in the format and like what you can expect at Eternal Weekend. Great job, and we'll link that somewhere. Because that's definitely worth checking out. But one of the things was like the Mystic Forge decks are no longer Mystic Forge decks because they're just playing. They have like slightly different plan and better cards have been printed since then.
Yeah, you also have to assume that PO is just the or whatever version of PO that it continues to evolve to is probably just a better plan because you have similar power, but then you also have interaction where otherwise you're playing a glass cannon.
Something I wondered, Phil, when because I didn't get to watch the final between Tony and Swifty time. You would think that Hullbreacher would be great against PO. And I wonder because the deck's not like full of removal. The PO deck doesn't have like the removal base, It's been so long since I casted PO and played Vintage. Do you like have to choose? Like, let's say you cast PO, and I flash in Hullbreacher. You already targeted your things, right? And you have to draw cards, as it were. Is that how that works? It's been so long.
PO targets.
Yeah, so you would bounce all those things, and I don't think they're maze, they're must draws. So you would get the crate. So you would think that Hullbreacher would be pretty good against that deck, and I guess they weren't able. Swifty time wasn't able to leverage it.
Well, there is a nod to Bowmaster and Hullbreacher in the sideboard with what's the it's one in a colorless -3/-3. It's not Warping Well. It's the other one.
Something. Twisted something. I know what you're talking about. No. The Eldrazi twisted experiment card.
It gives a creature -3/-3, and it's 1 and a colorless mana, not generic mana.
Yeah.
So, but that is essentially your Doomblade for all the creatures that you care about.
Yeah.
And it's like that is there instead of it deals with everything, and it's 1 mana in that like you can tomb it and kill whatever you want. You can Ancient Tomb to cast it.
Yeah.
And that the fact that you're a deck that is trying to ring for a bunch of cards that you don't just have to spend as much life to kill a thing, and there isn't anything that there's nothing that the deck cares about that whatever the card is. It's 1 in a colorless -3/-3. But there's nothing that card doesn't kill that Dismember does, like the additional -5 versus -3. There's nothing in the format that punishes what the deck's trying to do. So I mean, you can see that there's been some reps, right? It's understanding what the things you care about are. But I think that like if you wanted to move back into figuring out what 8-cast looks like, I remember I was watching a Justin Gennari video where he was playing Vintage and he had Phyrexian Metamorph as
that's a card too.
Well, the thing is like I was like, oh, there seems to be some interesting space of like, okay, I think the one thing that 8cast has to like, like the one constraint of 8cast is that it, in order to, because it's not attacking a mana base and it has limited interaction in that like the number of force, like it has stack interaction, but it has less on board removal. So it's like it's got like Aether Spellbomb that maybe is recursive. It's got Otawara, which okay, you have your one shot, but because those answers to whatever it is that you're trying to deal with, it means that you kind of are stuck playing. I mean, you're not stuck, but like you're really incentivized for everything that you do to be proactive at all times, even your answers.
Yeah.
And so because Hull Breacher is this reactive answer, even if it's a 3-2, it's a 3-2 that doesn't help any of the rest of what your deck is trying to do. Where I like the idea, it's like, okay, if we like the idea of Metamorph being this space of like, okay, it can copy your Thought Monitor, it can copy another big construct and just be a 3 mana 8/8 or whatever, or it can copy any of your other rocks for whatever you need, or like the fact that it's flexible in that regard, but it's still proactive in that like it's proactive by giving you all those things. But then also if your opponent plays a Bowmaster, you're like, okay, play this, copy your Bowmaster, shoot your Bowmaster.
Yeah,
and it's like it's an answer while still being proactive. Like it gives you the option to be proactive. Like does it stop like the draw engines like Beans? No. Is there other ways to deal with that stuff? I think so. I think if it was like, if that was the kind of card that was going to bury you, then like I feel like looking towards a space that like the colorless space of like nuking stuff. Like there are colorless options, even if they're expensive. But I feel like that's a better place to lean than the reactive cards. You know, because the reactive cards give your opponent time. They give your opponent ability to maneuver around it. Like if you play a Hull Breacher against me, or if I think a Hull Breacher is going to play it against me, I don't have to move, right? Yeah. And then if you're like, well, I have to keep pressure on, and then you move, then I get to respond to you moving. Like you don't have the narrative in that scenario. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that like if we're like the ideas of something like Urza, Lord High Artificer, or Phyrexian Metamorph, or any of these other tools, it keeps you in a proactive space, so you can continue to control the narrative and advancing your board presence. And then if there's anything that you need to deal with to like solve those problems, particularly like if you're like, okay, I need a way to deal with this thing, even if there's a colorless answer that's really expensive, right? I know there's probably like the 1 mana like pay 5, destroy a permanent or whatever, right? Even in that space, it's like, okay, well, if we want to play something like that to deal with a problem, granted it's not good, but like hear me out. The idea being, it's like if the best options for us in this space and we're not trying to splash, then what's a way that we can then enable those things even more? Something like Urza being a nice mana boost can then also put you over the top, right? And help you rebuild and do a bunch, it's like it just keeps you proactive. And I feel like that's a really optimal space to be, particularly if we think that EW is going to be wide,
Yeah.
Like
that card's spatial contortion, by the way.
Spatial contortion. It's spatial contortion. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that I know we had the episode about miracles, and the reason why like I've found Up the Beanstalk to be invigorating for that style of shell, even though I'm still figuring it out. I had a good 4-0, then I had a bad 1K, and then I came back and had another good local. So like I'm back and forth because I'm still like figuring it out, and because like I have some people that I talk to, but the only people, very few people are actually iterating specifically on the kind of miracles that I play. But what I like about Beanstalk is that it's a proactive threat. It's similar to what Counterbalance was for me, right? Where it's like I can, in the blind, proactively cantrip to this proactive thing that's going to advance my game plan. And anything that doesn't contribute to that, if you're like, well, this is a problem, if it's not contributing to the rest of the deck, it's going to feel bad when you draw it if it doesn't exactly convert in the way where your opponent agrees to it converting. It's what we were talking about like earlier with Veil of Summer, right? Veil of Summer feels really good, but like your opponent also can just choose to not have it be good for you, right? It's like if they know that you're holding up Veil and have to port yourself for the Veil, they can just continue what they're doing and not Thoughtseize. And then take control of the narrative of the game. And then the second that the shield on Veil is down, then they can Thoughtseize you, right? So like they control the pace of that game. Even if they suspect a Veil. Now, if they walk into Veil, great, game's over. You got blown out. But like, it doesn't always. It's not always like that. Even though it's good, it's not always that good.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like Hull Breacher. Like, yeah, if they fire off a brainstorm randomly into your Hull Breacher and you get them, congratulations, you got them, right? But like, that's somebody who's not thinking about it. In which case, okay, you got the one person who wasn't thinking about it. But like, you're not going into a major event trying to beat the people who aren't thinking about it. You know?
Exactly.
You're going to play a long tournament against a lot of good players, and they're going to be thinking about it.
I mean,
And you want
this is probably going to be the highest skill test of the year for any legacy player. Like, this is where you go to play legacy.
I think that like if you're the deck that wants to like it feels hard for 8-cast to play from behind if it's not playing Psy, right?
Yeah.
Or if you don't have multiple sagas, or if Kappa Cannoneer isn't exactly the haymaker in the matchup that they can't deal with, right? Which is give and take. Like not every matchup is the same. Kappa Cannoneer is really bad against fast combo, right? Like it's not all the tools are for all of the jobs, but like it's really hard to like if you're playing Patrick Automaton, which means that you're lower on the number of Psys you have. I mean, Psy was the best way to recoup from a meltdown, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, sure, you meltdown. I'll play this Psy and I'll just blow my load again, and now I have a lethal board again. Good luck. Try and figure out your thing. And then if you recur your meltdown or whatever, or cast another one, great. I still have the Psy. You know, I'll just play a couple of draw twos and go off again, and then rebuild, right? And you can rebuild. So like Psy is very good from playing from behind and like checking and controlling a board because of the Thopters and whatnot, and playing in a high resource situation where it's like, regardless of even if your opponent has the answer, a card like Psy still gives you the narrative of the game, right? Because it's like, okay, I can melt down your board, but like either you converted, if you had extra mana, you converted some of those artifacts into card draw anyway to recoup, or you just get to go out again if we're still in a high resource situation. And it's like, you know, and that's also a variety of like Meltdown's power level is only tied to how many Seed of the Synod that you drew that game, you know?
Yeah.
That's all. Like, there's a lot of variables, some out of your control, you know, based on how a draw lines up. But like, it's an answer. It's a roundabout answer to a problem that keeps you proactive. And I think it's like if you want to stop your opponent's engines, then the way to do that is probably like either you go over it's an arms race with an engine, right? Like you have a better engine than they do. You have a engine that compels them to act, or you do something that stops them in an inadvertent way. So like if Hull Breacher, which doesn't keep the narrative in your favor, right? Like it keeps you at parity and the tension remains. Yeah. But if you can go, okay, if they go Beanstalk and you're like, cool, Tangle Wire you. Tap you down for 3 turns. Right?
And if you can somehow get that back out with Emery, like that's
that's just like one example that I'm thinking of. I'm not necessarily saying that it's great, but like it is an example of like it has versatility in that like, okay, your opponent, it puts your opponent in a position where they can't leverage their engine, but still keeps you proactive. And then it's like, okay, it can tap down your blockers. It can, you know, time walk while you can continue to advance your engine, because every turn that they can't do, or any turn where they are stymied in their development, it's another turn with your Emery. It's another turn where you're getting the Urza Saga and inventing your thing. It's a couple more thought casts like that. It's not a direct answer to the Beanstalk, but you're not trying to necessarily play an infinitely long game. You're an aggressive creature deck.
No, you want your game to be relatively short. In truth,
you're like I want to like come out the gates in the early game, dominate the mid game, and hopefully kill you before we get to the late game. Now there's staying power. The deck has staying power, which is why it's so good. It's versatile. It's a lot of angles. But if I were playing 8-cast, I would look towards things like Psy. I would look towards things like Tameshi, you know, which is, I get off the beaten path, but it does pick up a Saga out of the yard. It can rebuild from a meltdown or other types of destruction effects, and it's also a legend, so it keeps your Ottawaras high, it keeps your blue count high, but it does something similar to what Psy does, which is it helps you rebuild, but it does something similar in the Emery space, where it's another Emery if they, you know, deal with your Emerys. So you can go turn 1 Emery, they fight over it, and you're like, okay, turn 2, slam this Tameshi, play an Opal, bounce my land back, rebuy, you know, whatever one of the lands that were flipped over from the Emery, and now I have my engine back online. You know, so it's proactive. That's all. It's proactive, and it's not necessarily direct answers to the problem in a way where it's like a control mage is just like, I'm going to counter it on the stack, or I'll just remove it with a removal spell. You know, it might require some out of the box thinking, but I think that I will still be respecting 8-cast to its full extent.
Yeah, I think anybody who thinks that they won't see 8-cast is probably very mistaken. The deck is obviously still very much alive. It just has lost a few points. From there, though, maybe we should talk about the Berserk decks, right?
I just want to one last thing on it, because I know that you brought up the ring, and I think that like if I were playing ACAST, I'm not an ACAST mage, but if I were playing ACAST at EW, or if I was testing for it, and I was looking at a 4-drop, I would be looking at Urza Lord High Artificer heavier than I would the One Ring.
Yeah, I think that's smart.
Because it helps you rebuild. It's another construct, so it helps you beat up on Urza Saga mirrors. But the fact that it can help you go way over the top in your mana over something over your opponent, and the activated ability for a sync, you have a lot of really good hits out of 8-cast off of that sync, right? Like you flip any of your draw twos, any of your additional threats, like that's all really good stuff. And so like I think that like the ring is good if you're playing a ring deck that's abusing it, but if you're trying to stay proactive, I would lean towards something like Urza or something like Sai, or the idea of Tangle Wire seems really appealing to me in this moment. I just don't know what players are thinking. Like how like if the answers to you are Energy Flux and Meltdown, and you're like, all right, in your upkeep, tap down all of your lands. Good luck, right? Like you don't you like when you need the Meltdown, you need it immediately, right? Because otherwise you get chunked for 12. Like you don't have time, and it's like if you just stymie that for a turn, get you.
Yeah, and that all that comes down to honestly is, so many patterns of play with 8-cast are start with Saga, throw down the Ancient Tomb, get a guy, untap, get a guy, right? Throw on a play another Ancient Tomb. Throw the what's it called onto it. Throw the Shadow Spear onto the thing and attack, right? But if instead of going to get the Shadow Spear, you play the Ancient Tomb, get an Opal, and play a Tangle Wire, that's as good. That's as good as dead. Who cares if you're gaining life? Your opponent probably only has like 2 or 3 things on the board.
I just think that there's so much space for the deck to pick and choose its battles. I don't think it needs to be like ACAST is so flexible. The problem the problem facing ACAST is that there's so many different angles that it would always have. It's like, are you going to get buried on multiple draw twos? Are they going to have a Chalice Emery draw? Are you going to have a Psy plus Force draw? Like any combinations of all of that, right? Like the fact that you can never act like when you keep a 7 against ACAST, you're like, I mean, it's good against some of it. But like if they just draw any of the other ones and then you just get buried in that
the other half of the deck, I mean the deck feels like it always is running on 2 axes. It's either doing Saga stuff or it's doing Kappa stuff. And I see Kappa stuff, but really Automaton. Like either you're killing all of your baubles to draw more baubles and make your guys bigger, or you're just keeping them on the board and like attacking with creatures that your opponent basically gets 2 for 1 just for dealing with.
To simplify, because I agree, I think to simplify the take on Hull Breacher is to remember what, like, if you're the ACAST player, remember what your role is. It's like if you're gonna go, if your engines, right, like you were talking about, like, oh, it's tough to play against Dark Ritual or Fast Combo or whatever. I mean, that's why you have the full suite of 8 forces across the 75, right? In which case, you're the deck that has to stop the opponent, but if you're going to play against the deck that's trying to stop you, don't try necessarily and stop them, right? I remember a long time ago, we had the conversation where you were like, we were talking about some random control list. And I was like, I would never play something like this because it just assumes that the answers line up and your opponent has to agree to it. Like, I want some kind of proactive something in my control deck. Even if it doesn't seem like it's proactive, you play it as though it's proactive. And I remember you were saying, you were like, dude, I could never do this. I want to be able to present threats. I want to be the one that controls the narrative of the game. And
it's just not my style, even though I am the Durdle Magus, right?
But I think, like, to that extent, that's where I mean, like, don't lose sight of that. Like, if you are the 8-cast player or, any other deck that's in a similar space, like, don't forget, like, if you're the proactive deck, if you're the deck that's presenting threats, present the threats. Unless a deck it doesn't care about it, and then you have to, switch roles, then switch roles. Looking at you, Dark Ritual. But otherwise, like, who's the beatdown? Don't forget.
The other 2 decks I'm looking at are Berserk decks, and so, I would be playing like a green, like a Sultai version of Death Shadow with Berserks, or I'd be playing the deck that I want to more talk about, which is Infect, right?
And if you're curious about Infect, we just got the deck tech from Femmer's Cloud, so check that out.
That's right here. Check that out. So that is a deck that just looks it just looks like it's going to be kind of underrated and worth checking out, just because, like, knowing that people don't really remember how to play against 8cast completely, you're going to get a couple of people just on like, whoops, I forgot I shouldn't have done this during attack. Oh, you find Zavast wooded into the win against me, you know. I think that is appealing to me. And it was appealing when I was playing the deck as a alternate to my Rug Delver deck. It's just like, okay, everyone's seen Rug Delver, I'm going to switch over to this, you know.
Mm-hmm. And not only that too, but like, I don't know if anybody has, like, I have played against a lot of split second in my lifetime. Like, I have faced many a Crozen grip back in the day. So like, I remember how much of a terrible experience trying to play against split second is, or navigate around split second. Luckily, I was a counterbalance player, so like you can set up the counterbalance, because like you actually can counter split second with a counterbalance trigger, but you have to have the thing on top already. You can't do any shenanigans in between. But I think a lot of people don't really know how powerful split second is, and if you try and imagine split second in gameplay and you're like, oh yeah, it's really powerful, and then it actually happens against you, like when somebody actually like just goes, all right, quick reflexes, you can't do anything.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of this. Judge, like
the people will go in response, and you're going to be like, you're going to Dikembe Mutombo them, and you're going to be like,
you're going to literally see the like 7 stages of grief or 5 stages of grief happen, like as like you play against somebody with that card. I think.
Yeah, I think that like the one thing to remember about Infect too is that the deck did not have removal beyond berserking the opponent or post board when they would board in Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah.
But like other than that, the deck was just trying to get you dead or like not care about your creatures with like flying and unblockable stuff.
Yeah.
And now that they just have this proactive thing that can also deal with an opposing threat, that's a whole new axis that Infect did not have before.
Yeah.
And I think that like if you're sleeping on it, don't. I think is like I think like I don't know how many people other than you and Fenris Cloud and like committed Infect mages are actually going to pick up Infect and play it legitimately at EW, because two things about it. It's not like, everybody just has ink moths and 4 trops that they're ready to sleeve up and play with noble hierarchs, you know. But the other thing is you do not want to pick up Infect without reps. You do not want to do it. Don't do it. Don't do that.
I tried 2 weeks ago when I was playing the Vines and Royal Treatment version of the deck, and I was soft, like I need to toughen up and really get in more runs with the deck. I'll be playing in a local this coming up week, and I'll try and see if that works. Depending on whether or not I decide to play that deck or fool around with 8cast, but I think I almost by the time this episode comes out, I'm almost positive I'm not going to play Death Shadow. I think for a few reasons. One of them being, I think, yeah, like we were saying before, like Scam is a better deck. But me being able to be like, oh, cool, I'm going to play, the Berserk version of the deck was like a neat nod to not being able to play Infect. But now that I can play Infect, why wouldn't I just do that, right?
Yeah, I think that Scam is a better version of Death Shadow, because none of the like Death Shadow gets hit by a bunch of removal that the rest of the threats just don't.
And the deck just straight loses to Chalice of the Void on 1.
Right. Yeah. There's a bunch of that. I think Scam. I mean, I personally don't like Scam in its play patterns, because I feel like or not play patterns, but like the deck is not as fast as like a Delver Death Shadow type of variant but it's still a Daze deck.
Yeah.
But then it's also is still trying to leverage the fact that it's a reanimate deck with the new troll.
Yeah.
And so it like puts a lot of tension on the play draw. Yeah. Like if you're playing Scam and you're not proficient, like you need to know how to navigate games very differently on the play versus the draw in a way that feels a lot steeper than most. Like obviously you're usually advantageous if you're on the play with any deck that you're playing.
Yeah.
But particularly one where it's like you're a Daze grief deck and it's like, you really got to get online. But I think that Scam is going to be super popular, and so people are going to be prepared for it. And that's also something for people to keep in mind as they go into EW. It's like, are people going to be prepared for what you're playing? And if so, what are they going to be prepared with?
Yeah.
And then go a level beyond that and be like, okay, what are my answers to that? Do I have the space in my deck to salvage that if I'm easily stopped by some kind of hate? You know, it's like if you're a 4 reanimate deck as part of your suite of threats, you know, and Murktide is also one of your threats, you're really pushed into the graveyard.
Yeah.
And if people have ways to stop you from accessing the graveyard, a la like the Leyline Avoid mono black decks, it's going to be tough, right? They can just put 0 mana, your threats don't do anything for the rest of the game, and now you're stuck with like a bunch of 6 mana threats that you can't cast and griefs, and that's your only way beyond Bowmaster. And it's going to be tough for Bowmaster to go coast to coast.
Yeah,
I don't know what the point was beyond just like, again, know your role.
Yeah,
you got to know your role. But Zach, I look forward to, at the very least, meeting you at the finals of a side event.
Yeah,
where this time,
boss.
where this time I will avenge myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think from there, let's talk about your journey the last like week. So we had that 4-0. Then you played in a 1K, and would you like 0-3 drop?
So what I found was, as I was playing, is I found that when I did really well that one time at the local, and I ran through a good range of decks, right? Like I faced combo, I faced mid range, I faced control. I got a good suite of what I was playing against.
Yeah.
What I found was I was playing in a sense of very low stakes. I had been on such a losing streak that I was like, okay, let me try this thing new. I'm gonna, I was way calmer when I played. And then what I found is when I played at the 1K, and then when I played at my local yesterday, I found like when I got that 4-0, I was like, looking back, I was like, there were a couple of spots where I punted and it cost me, but in ways where I was like, oh, that was a learning experience.
Yeah.
Where then afterwards, where I was like, okay, well now I want to prove that wasn't a fluke. And then I punted way more. I started punting way more because I got like put undue pressure on myself to like be clever when I didn't need to be clever. I should have just like done the straightforward play that was better in the moment. And I was falling into like my own trap of like wanting to feel clever and be like, oh no, I came up with this, like this is I can navigate around it in this way, and that'll give me in these kinds of positions that like, you know, if we end up in that future, like I want to be prepared for it. And it was just like, or just, you know, deal with the problem that you know is the problem. You know, like don't contrive a future that doesn't exist, assuming that you want to be ready for the thing that you're never going to face.
Yeah, it's like when I phantasmal image that guy's Charlotte's agent.
Yeah,
it was like trying to be cute. For what? It's like, for what reason? No reason.
And like sometimes that's warranted. Like, you know, we just spent most of the episode talking about how 8cast solves like a very unique problem that it's trying to solve, right? Yeah. And in ways where it's like, okay, but like if it's like if we're trying to identify and solve a problem, be clear cut to what the problem is or what the circumstances of that problem are, and then be realistic with what the answers are, even if like you want to do something fun or cool or whatever, or you know. So like it was a learning experience in that regard where I was like, I think that there is something to this list because the engine, like the thing is like Beanstalk gets a lot of the clout right now, and as it should. Card's obviously excellent, and you know there's no denying that. Card is very good, and it is when being able to draw cards at instant speed, having an engine that like going long, the fact that they stack, like there's endless good things to say about the card. But one thing that is also really valuable about my kind of miracles is that it's also the Mystic Sanctuary deck in a way that no other deck is the Mystic Sanctuary deck.
It's true.
And there's a lot of tools that can be leveraged there, and a lot of flexibility that can be leveraged in that. And I think what I found was I got so caught up in being like, okay, yeah, I'm going to try and abuse the beanstalk, and I'm going to do these cool stuff with the beans, and I'm going to, you know, it's like beans can just be a good card.
Yeah.
And your good cards can work with your good cards, and you can have good cards synergize with good cards, and it can be good.
Yeah.
And, but like, you don't have to go too in the weeds trying to like play around all the stuff when you can just remember what your deck does. And that was like a problem. Like I remember, so like I just played at the local yesterday, and that match will be on camera, and we'll see like I had a streak of games where I was just like, man, I feel like I'm just in the pocket of these games, right? Like I'm playing tight. I know what matters. I'm thinking about what matters. Like at no point did it feel like I was out of step with what was going on in the game, or where the game was progressing, or what my role in the matchup at a given time was in the game.
Of course.
And then what'll be nice about looking at those games versus a game that I just played actually against Chris Benucci of 90s MTG yesterday. I played against him, and we could watch that one back that I play against Chris, and there's just like a consistent sequence of punts like that lead to a position where I lose with resources and access to tools that would help me not lose the game.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not like, it was a continuous sequence of punts that like led to the next punt, and it was all bad, and it was bad. The actual baseline punt was just a misassessment of what the role was in the game.
Yeah.
And it's because I was trying to get too cute. And it's the same thing. Like it's very reminiscent of the Hull Breacher thing, right? Yeah. I put myself in position trying to keep the tension for my opponent to stumble. But then if your opponent is good and understands their role in the matchup and understands what their deck is supposed to do in those circumstances, they're not just going to let you line up this like cool play that like pays off in your head.
Yeah.
You know? And I walked myself into a position where I'm like, this will happen, then he'll do this, and then I'll get this, and it'll be ABC, clean cut.
Yeah.
And that's just not the world that you play in when you're playing against good players. And it was a great learning experience with a new deck that I do think has legs as I continue to evolve and figure out the best sideboard cards and ways to deal with the problems that it has. But like, it's been a fun reminder to be like, remember your role. Yeah. Remember your role. I'll give one example before then if there's anything else that you want to touch on for this episode.
I want to bring up. Yeah.
But there was one really good example where he cast a creature that gave him the initiative, right? So he thought seized me and he recognized that I didn't have an answer for him to slam an initiative creature. So he slammed his initiative creature, took the initiative. I then went, okay, I was testing out Solitudes. So I went instant speed, Solitude, your thing, Beanstalk trigger, flip it and treat, put 2 angels into play, take the initiative. Yeah. And then he went and then spammed a bunch of creatures. And then I was like, okay, I have access to terminus this board and hang on to the initiative.
Okay.
But what I did instead was I Mystic Sanctuaried for a Force Will on top, thinking that I was going to be able to find a blue card off of my next couple of draws underneath that force to then protect everything with the angels.
Okay.
But like, now that seems fine because my angels are bigger than everything that he's doing. And if we're just going to trade back and forth, and also my angels were a 2-turn clock, like there was a lot of tension where I was like, it feels like I should just, the roles have reversed and I should be the beatdown. I have the initiative.
Yeah.
He's on a 2-turn clock. Like he doesn't have blockers. Like even if he takes the initiative back, then I'll be able to just swing for lethal. He'll have to put like flying threats into play. But we were in a developed board state. His deck is a flexible deck. He understands, how to navigate. He understands what my deck can do and what the potent threats are. So I put this force on top instead of Terminus to then clean up the board and just hang on to the initiative.
Yeah.
Which my deck is the Terminus deck. Yeah. I'm the Terminus deck playing against the creatures, and I have the engines.
Yeah.
I have a Beanstalk and the initiative. There's no reason for me to be thinking, no, I can do this cute.
Not to mention, like, just one fetch land puts you back in as the aggressor, right? Like...
But that's what I mean. Like I was just like, oh no, I can do this cool thing where I solitude his thing, and then I can make angels, and then I can put him on a 2-turn clock, and then I can beat down, and then I have the like control over everything. But it's like I allowed him access to all of these tools that I otherwise just never needed to allow him.
Yeah.
Right. And that was just it was a series of punts that I made because I misevaluated my position in the matchup in that spot. And I should have just recognized, I was like, I have the engines. I'm ready to go long. Let me not let him get access to any more resources and close the game. There was no reason for me to hold the tension.
Yeah.
Right. I should have relieved the tension. I should have simplified. But I misevaluated my role and got punished for it, as I should.
Yeah.
And so that's, as I've like been trying out the deck, it's also been the fun reminder of, don't forget your fundamentals. Don't forget your 101s and what your deck is trying to do. And these new cards and like new interactions with the new cards have made me be like, oh, I haven't played Solitude in a long time. Oh, I haven't played Solitude with Beans before. I'm going to do all this cool, fun, tricky stuff, and it's going to be awesome. I'm going to do all these sweet, cool, clever things. And it's just like, complicated and clever for the sake of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's like terminus, therefore beings, therefore sanctuary. Like, don't get lost in the mess of the other things if you don't need to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Don't get lost in the sauce. Like, your structure is working. Like, if the structure works, follow. Like, that's your role. Like, there's no reason to not follow. So that's why it's like, if you're the ACAST player, you're trying to come up with other deck and you're finding that you're not having the kind of success that you want. Like, remember your fundamentals. Like, what's your deck trying to do? What's the axis that it fights on? What are the problems that would stop you from having that engine or being able to fight on the axis that you want to fight on, that you can supplement your structure with, and just go and presume that your homework is good.
Yeah.
Like, if you're competent and you think your homework is good, trust it.
So I want anybody who's playing Miracles, I want to address a thing I learned this week in the comments section. A few people pointed out, and I'm sure you probably already know this, Phil. Entreat on 1 draws you a card with beans. Yeah, I didn't realize that. So that's an interesting thing, because it's looking at the casting cost of the Entreat. So that's cool. And then the other thing, I think to sum all this up is just like, don't get cute. You don't need to get cute. Just play solid Magic and win your games. Like, don't do funny things. Like, this is an EDH. Don't do silly stuff just to get a reaction. Like, that's something I have to tell myself a lot, because I do play EDH, and sometimes I'm like, ooh, I want to do the splashy play. I want to cast the one of in my deck, that kind of thing. Like, no, don't do that. Just win the game, win the match.
Yeah, it was a good reminder. I mean, particularly, like, we have this channel, we have people that are, asking us about, what's our take on XYZ type cards, or, trying XYZ things. And, like, first time winning in a while. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm the smartest guy there is. I did it. I can do anything. And then, getting getting punched in the mouth essentially was like the nice reminder of like, no, man, like it worked before because you trusted what you did, and that was good. And it's like, I think that like there's the cute fun plays come when your structure is working and you're navigating it properly.
Yeah.
Like, when your deck does a powerful thing and it pays you off for doing that powerful thing, and you can navigate that powerful thing against your opponent's powerful thing, and you can do it in optimal circumstances under like both time pressure and stakes pressure, like, that's the impressive thing. Yeah. The cute play or whatever you made, that's a nice touch of sugar on top, but it's not the meal. Nobody's going out for just the dessert. We want the meal. You're trying to come home with a trophy. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to cut it from here. Thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. If you have a chance and you have the means to support the channel, patreon.com/Eternal Durdles. We've gotten a couple of new subscribers over the last couple of days. So, anytime people can help us out keeping this thing alive, especially now that I'm not just doing the channel anymore, that will continue to motivate us to continue making great content for you. So anyhow, thanks so much for watching, and we will catch you next week.
Trust your homework.
Thanks so much again for watching. If you can support the channel, go to patreon.com/Eternal Durdles and check out this Legacy 101 content. We've got everything you need to get ready for Eternal Weekend.